Hello, everyone. St. James, greetings. This is Pastor Bianca. To those who are calling in, or if you're logging in on Facebook or YouTube, this is your first time joining with us. Let us know who you are, maybe where you are viewing from. We have had a lot of countries actually view a lot of our online sessions. And so if you're out of the country, if you are in another state other than North Carolina or another city other than Durham or Raleigh, please let us know. Definitely, we are in for a treat on today. I just believe that this is going to be an impactful and insightful conversation. We have some very intelligent minds on this particular call and viewing and session. And so I'm excited about that. Those St. James members who are logging in, just a reminder that on tomorrow we have a special live session at 7 p.m. Our very own Derek Germain is going to be on. And so I am excited about that session. I'm so excited about learning more about his producing, his music production, songwriting, everything that he's already recorded, songs that we already sing and we don't realize he's the writer. And so I'm excited to learn a little bit more about our own director of music. So we look forward to that live session on tomorrow at 7 p.m. And I see so many folks coming in from St. James. Blessings to you. Blessings to you. Hey, everybody. I'll be glad when we can have these type of sessions in person, but I'm so glad that we can connect online. Good evening, Miss Perry, Miss Wilson, Miss Frazier, God bless you. Miss Borden, how are you? Blessings, good to see you in. Good. We're gonna bring these special guests on shortly. I just want a few more people to come in. If you are coming in, please like and share on Facebook if you can. And then also on YouTube, if you want to share, you can share that live as well on any social media outlet. And then also we're on the conference call, and we do have a few people who are not on social media, but they like to dial in to hear the discussion. So we are servicing all levels of technology, telephone, Facebook, and YouTube. And so we have some folks on right now as well. Good to see you, Miss Janet. All right, well, we're gonna bring everyone on, our special guests. Blessings, everybody, how y'all doing?
Good evening.
Good evening. Good. So as you know, we are having this discussion about the law, the church, and the voter. And that's why you all were invited. So thank you again for accepting this invitation.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes,
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so as we get started, because some people may not know, who you are. So I don't want to introduce you and then introduce you again and then you introduce yourselves, right? So when we're going to have essentially 3 sessions, and I just want to make sure that everyone hears this just so they can know what to expect. We're going to talk about the law. We're going to talk about the church. We're going to talk about the voter. However, any one of our guests, if you have some part to play or some comment in any section, obviously you can comment and add your opinion, or if you have some knowledge about something, please add that as well. We definitely want to hear from you. Also, if you would like to, our viewer audience, if you would like to ask any questions, you can do so by commenting, but you can also text your question to 919-283-4617. And it's at the bottom of the screen. You can also text your question to 919-283-4617. So let's get started. Mr. Charles Watkins. So introduce yourself just a little bit, and we're going to get started. And we're going to talk about the law.
I hate doing this. My name is Charles Watkins. Bianca and I went to high school together. I am currently an assistant United States attorney in the Western District of New York. So I live in Buffalo, where it gets really, really cold.
All right, good deal, good deal. So I invited Charles to speak at another discussion that was for some pastors and some other partners. And we started talking about a few different things. And one of the things that has been on the news a lot since we actually had our last discussion is qualified immunity. But I know when we hear qualified immunity from a policing perspective, I understand that everyone does not know necessarily what that means or have a full understanding. So, Charles, if you can help us understand what qualified immunity is so that everyone can understand when we hear it, what does that mean?
Okay. So in 1967, the United States Supreme Court basically made up qualified immunity. Like it's judge-made law. So they made up qualified immunity, and the thought process behind making it up was to protect police officers from frivolous lawsuits when they engaged in in their duty and they made a mistake is how it was termed. And so that's the birth of qualified immunity. And it's morphed into things that we see today, like, you can't sue the police unless they knowingly, intentionally, and knowing and intentionally violate your constitutional rights. And you have to prove that before you can even get to suing.
Okay, so qualified immunity is something that you have to prove before you can actually get to a charge, because oftentimes we see these cases where it's like, how in the world do they get off? How in the world do they not get a charge? It's obvious, it's been filmed. We can see that this was truly something that was a mistake, but this is something that my understanding from our discussions that they have to overcome in order to even get to a charge. Is that correct?
Yeah, you have to borrow a term from corporate law, you have to pierce the veil of qualified immunity before you can get to the police officer. So you have to tear that down before you can get to them. You have to prove that what they did was so egregious that they weren't acting in the course and scope of their duty as a government official, that they're not covered by this immunity. And then once you get there, then we can get into whether or not what they did is criminal or whether or not what they did exposes them to civil liability.
Wow. Okay, and so that explains a lot of what we see we've seen in the past, right? As it relates to that. Now, you mentioned something just now. You said that it's really a judge-made law. Is that correct?
Yeah. So essentially, we have three branches of government. So we learned that in civics, executive, legislative, and judicial. We know that the executive branch enforces the law. That's what I do. I'm a part of the executive branch, so I enforce the law. The legislative branch makes the law. That's Congress. Judicial branch kind of tells you what the law is. They're not supposed to make law, but sometimes in some instances they have cases that come up that are what we call cases of first impression, and the Supreme Court will make a ruling on that case that will become law. And so judges make the law. That's why we call it judge-made law.
Okay, that makes sense, because I was going to ask you about this article that came out where some folks appealed to the Supreme Court. I think if we looked at the news, we saw that to revisit qualified immunity. And the Supreme Court decided that they won't make a judgment on it, that they will leave it up to the Congress. So what's your opinion about that?
Well, in order for the Supreme Court to make a judgment, right? So they made this judgment on qualified immunity, made this thing that they said was qualified immunity. Problematic though it was, that's kind of what happened. But in order for them to make a judgment, there has to be a case. There has to be an issue, a justiciable issue in front of them. So when they're saying leave it up to Congress, what they're saying is they're kind of punting. They're saying we'll let Congress make a law to undo what we did in 1967 if Congress wants to. Or, you can get a ruling of qualified immunity on the state level, appeal it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And if you appeal it all the way up to the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court can say, upon further review, we think qualified immunity is unconstitutional. And that's the only way they can do it. But they can't just out and out say, hey, no, qualified immunity is bad.
Okay, that makes sense. But what happens when you have a state like Colorado who has decided that they're going to remove qualified immunity from Colorado's police officers? So they, just made a judgment call outside of the Supreme Court or the Congress, and they just said, okay, any police officer in our state no longer has qualified immunity. How does that play in?
Okay, so two separate sovereigns, right? So you have federal law, state law, right? They're two different things. So usually federal law is the floor and the state law is the ceiling. So the least amount of rights you can get is federal law. And the state says that this is the most amount of rights you can get. So the state of Colorado is saying, hey, you know what, police officers, we're going to take away qualified immunity. So it takes you back to the floor. So that means federally, qualified immunity is still intact. So you can't get a 1983 civil rights action against you unless we pierce the veil of qualified immunity. But in the state of Colorado, if Colorado has, certain laws that police officers were protected under because of qualified immunity, that doesn't exist anymore.
Gotcha.
So now, federally they're still the same, but state law is like, no, we're not doing that anymore.
Okay. Understood. Here's another question. So, and if anyone has any questions about qualified immunity, please comment. You can also text as well. I'm watching our text messages just to make sure I can view that as well. So please let us know. Now, looking into the law, we had a very in-depth discussion about the law. And you talked about the different types of law. And I asked a question, and I want to ask it publicly because there are some aspects to this that was just very interesting. I asked you, was there any laws that supported racism or any laws that we didn't know about that supported injustice in any way as it relates to social justice? And I kind of want to ask you that again so that everyone can kind of hear and have an understanding of the law and a term that you use, and I'll let you introduce that.
So the short answer is no, right? But there's a longer answer. The short answer is no because in 1968, the 1968 Civil Rights Act, which came after the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which came after, the Emancipation Proclamation, which came after the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment. That was supposed to say there are no more racist laws in this country. We are no longer suborning racism legally in this country. So racism died. So slavery died. Jim Crow died. American apartheid died. But we still have laws on the book that aren't per se racist, but as applied, they are. And that's what makes them unconstitutional. So that's why I said there's a longer answer.
Mm-hmm.
So think about Ahmaud Arbery and the state of Georgia and the citizens arrest law.
Yeah.
And when you apply that law, there's a very distinct possibility that that law as applied is just culturally, it's racist. It disproportionately affects a suspect class, which would be Black people in this country. And the reason why Ahmaud Arbery was killed was because of this racist citizens arrest law that reads like the Fugitive Slave Act. And so in that respect, that law, while it might not be per se unconstitutional, as applied, it's unconstitutional because it disproportionately affects the suspect class. And we saw the Supreme Court very recently, this very conservative Supreme Court that's been surprising me with some of their decisions lately, pleasantly surprising me. But when they struck down the 10-2 jury rule that was still on the books in Louisiana and Oregon,
right,
they acknowledged that that rule was a holdover from Jim Crow and that it is, as applied, unconstitutional and racist because it disproportionately affects Black defendants. And so those laws, and the Supreme Court has the ability to say that while this law might not be per se unconstitutional, if we look at it in the way that it's applied, we can then find that it is unconstitutional, and we can strike this law down. So laws like, stand your ground, is just, if we're being honest, disproportionately affects Black people, because I have yet to see a stand your ground defense for a Black person, but I heard it ad nauseum with Trayvon Martin.
Right.
Citizens arrest, I have yet to see a Black person, an armed group of Black people, go and chase down a white man riding in a truck with guns and arrest him because they thought he was a burglar. But I saw that with Ahmaud Arbery, right? I have yet to see a 10-2 jury verdict sentence a non-Black person to prison for the rest of their lives. But we got people in Louisiana doing life in prison on 10-2 jury verdicts. And so these are laws, just three off the top of my head, that are disproportionately affecting Black people. Right.
Can you explain that 10-2 jury verdict and why that's so impactful? Because people just may not know really why that's impactful. Can you explain that a little bit?
So Black Americans make up 13% of the population in this country. Okay, and let's just say this all of this 13% can serve on a jury. Let's just say that. So that means that when you get a jury of your peers and you select from the community a jury of your peers, 13% of the people sitting in that room, if you get 100 people, only 13 of them are going to be Black. And when you start whittling them down to pick a jury, you're going to pick 12 people. Chances are 2 out of those 12 are going to be Black. And the other 10 are going to be white, Hispanic, Asian, something else. And so when you have a jury in a trial, like when I try somebody, I have to convince 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt to get a unanimous verdict of guilt. When we have these 10-2 jury verdicts, you don't have to convince 12, you only have to convince 10. And if you have a defendant who is more palatable to your non-Black jurors, and I only have 2, I can completely ignore them and only focus on convincing my 10 non-Black jurors. And so because of that, I'm not really trying you in front of a jury of your peers. I'm trying you in front of a jury of people who I think will convict you, minus these 2 who might vote against you. And so 10-2 jury verdicts, it doesn't work in the spirit of the Constitution.
Wow. Okay, good deal. And I have one last question specifically for you, and that is, I've heard some conversation on the news. Okay, if we take away qualified immunity, well, let's create police unions, a union for police. So let's talk about that. Is there a benefit truly to the public to creating police unions, in your opinion?
Well, no, short version, but no, because unions benefit the people who are members of the union. So like there's a police union in the state of New York. There's a police union. There's like Georgia has certain certain precincts in Georgia, certain jurisdictions in Georgia have police unions. So there's really, the benefit is for the people who are in the union. They pay a certain amount of their paycheck to be a part of the union, and that guarantees them legal representation. It guarantees them like representation in before they lose their job, so they can't just be summarily fired. It guarantees them due process and before they lose their job and things like that. And to be perfectly honest, the union benefits people in the union. So what would make us think that not being a part of that union would benefit us in any way? It just wouldn't. And that's not to say unions are good or bad. I really have no opinion on unions, but just the idea that a union would benefit, the general public in dealing with the police unions would benefit the general public in dealing with the police is a misnomer, and it's a distraction technique. So let them, if they want to create police unions, go ahead. It's fine, but that's not going to solve or create any more problems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And before we go on to just talking about the church's response and the church in this and everything, as it relates to, what we're talking about as it relates to the answers that have been given, the potential solutions that have been given, all of those things, what do you think, just from your opinion, is going to help in getting the problem solved as it relates to policing, as it relates to laws in general? I just kind of want to hear just from your synopsis, right? You're looking at it from different areas.
Well, I think that, first of all, I think this is different. Like we've seen this before. We've seen the protests. We've seen people get angry. We've seen the hurt feelings. But I think that now we're seeing something different. And I think because we're seeing something different, there's an opportunity here. And I think that opportunity comes with, we tell people register to vote, right? But when you register to vote, it's not just about what happens in the election booth. Because when you're registered to vote, you get to serve on juries, right? So you get to make sure that it's fair in the jury box, right? And if you are a person in a position like you're well educated, you have a degree, you want to do something, whatever, or what have you, run for office. Put yourself in a position to run for office. Make the changes that you want to see, because all these changes that we want to see are really on a local level. Like, we're asking for the federal government to do something about it, but it's really on a local level. District attorneys are who decides whether or not somebody gets prosecuted. So find yourself a candidate for district attorney that you really want to support. Help them run for office. Find yourself a candidate for your city commission that you really want to support. Help them run for office, because those people are the people who prosecute the criminals. Those people are the people who hire and fire your police chiefs. Those people are the people who have a direct impact on the kind of policing that's going to happen in your community. And that's where we are right now. We're on the street level. We're not worried about what's happening up here in DC right now. Eventually we're going to get there because we want that too. But right now we want the street level. We want to clean up this level. We want to clean up our own neighborhood, our own local areas before we start worrying about what's happening outside of that.
Good. Thank you so much, Charles. I appreciate your input. I definitely appreciate your input. Pastor Chad.
What's up? How's it going?
It's going good. Blessings. So listen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey everybody, again, Pastor Bianca, thank you again for the opportunity, and thank you for the privilege to share. My name's Chad. I'm a born and raised kid of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So all my Durham people kind of just right up the road a little bit. But actually I serve on staff at Galilee Missionary Baptist Church, and I serve as the special assistant to the pastor, and then I also serve as the senior pastor of Payne's Chapel Baptist Church, which is in Mount Airy, North Carolina. and then also work with the city of Winston-Salem as one of the fire chaplains for the city. And so that's a cool opportunity because I'm the only kind of Black guy in that role. So that's a fun opportunity to kind of get to share. And then I also serve as a campus minister at Wake Forest University, specifically with the Black Student Alliance, and kind of helping help those students and definitely people of color kind of navigate white educational spaces. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. Nothing really special. Just call me Chad, and yeah, that's it.
All right, that's cool. That's cool. So listen, I was looking at your Facebook page and I saw something. I saw a video of you at a rally, and you were at a rally. Someone had videotaped you, and you said prayer is the work. You said prayer is the work. And so some of my questioning, or just kind of, can you unpack that for us from a church perspective on what is our role? What do you feel like our role? Some people don't think that the church should get involved in politics. You know, there's still some who feel that, right? And so I kind of want you to talk from that perspective, right?
Okay. Again, thank you for the space to share, and to my brother who just shared and my sister that just shared. I think what's huge is for us to realize that it is, and our movement and our people's movement is collaborative work. I don't think it's just one entity. It's not just one section or sect of culture, but it literally has to be our people working in community, and I think working in concert together. And so for me, that day was kind of a weird day in a random situation, kind of with some friends who shared that day as well. And something that's big for me is I'm not the guy that's gonna like share like I'm not the guy that's gonna like repost a bunch of pictures of me at protests, and I'm not gonna be the guy. I think there's a lot of people who are like doing the social activism work for the gram right now, and that and not to say that like we don't need social activism work, but I think what's necessary is that I think we have to understand that like this isn't just a moment, and the protests are important, but they have to yield to something else. And like my brother was saying, it really has to yield to a change in our demographics in concert with voting, and then it also and how we kind of push and speak for policy change. So for me, when I read the Bible, kind of just as a pastor and kind of looking at the worldview of life through the Christian faith tradition, for me, what's really important is to realize that Jesus is a historical figure. He's a spiritual figure. He's a literary figure, and oftentimes I think we do wrong to the gospel, and I think we do wrong to the message of Jesus when we don't take into account the fact that a lot of the language and a lot of the things that Jesus is saying, Jesus is actually speaking to corrupt systems of power. And so I think in following Jesus and following the mission of the gospel, it causes us to speak truth to power. And I think it causes us to have an understanding and realizing that words are great, but work matters so much more. And so I think that for the church and for the body of Christ, we've oftentimes been caught by saying we're not political, or that we don't have a political message, or that we don't have a message for the full scope of humanity. And I think realizing that Jesus is a lot of times saying things that are much more political than we realize. I think he's saying things that are much more morally convicting and morally motivating to help and empower others. And so I think it's key to understand that we as people who are pushing for change and fighting and working right now, we as a church have to be people that pray. We have to be people that lean on that spiritual foundation, but leaning on that without allowing that to propel us to work, and leaning on that without allowing that to propel us to really pushing for a change in following the true message and example of Jesus, I think is huge. If that makes sense. Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And when you say a collaborative effort, we're not just talking about African-American pastors, right? I mean, I kind of want to unpack that, because there's been a lot of different conversations, and I've heard a lot of different, posts, and people are saying, well, I think that, it really should just be a certain group of people that are going for change and not another group of people. But when you say collaborative, is it, legal systems, or is it all Christian communities, not just the Black community? So you understand my question?
No, so I think that's a great question, and so I think to unpack that, I think that I will say this: I think that there are conversations that we as African Americans and we as Black people, I think there's conversations that we have to have first. I think that collaborative work in a multi-ethnic space is important. I think it's really valuable, but to realize that there's a like this isn't new to the Christian faith tradition, and so like while this might be perceived as cool work all of a sudden now, there's people like a Dr. James Perkins from Mississippi. There's a people like a Dr. Eric Mason from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I think there's people like a Dr. Gina Stewart in Memphis. There's a Reverend Dr. Freddie Haynes in Dallas. There's I think there is even now there's people who are doing this work, and so even to go back and look at it, I think that because I pastor in Black space, and I pastor in a Black context. I've worked in white spaces. I've worked in Caucasian space. I've worked in Caucasian spaces. I've worked in African American spaces. I've worked in blended spaces. What I can say is huge that I think that there is and Dr. Eric Mason kind of talks about how there's really a sadness at the fact that there's even a need for the Black church, right? When we go back and we look at like the AME church, and we look at like an Absalom Jones who has to create this other entity because historically Black people, enslaved people, oppressed people did not have a home in particularly white contexts in religious spaces. So I think that there is collaborative work that has to be done in concert with all communities and with all spaces. But I think that there is work that's necessary in our community, because I think a Black church is going to specifically speak to the needs of a Black community. I don't know if a multicultural space is going to do that. And not to say that there aren't, and not to say that I don't know places and spaces that are or will. But to the greater point, I think for African Americans, it's us working in concert with those who are writing policy, and for those who are doing the work of exercising the law. I think it's important for us to realize that we have to work in concert with a multiplicity of entities in order to really see change. And so it's not just going to be the Black pastors who fix it, because if Black pastors were going to fix it, it would have been fixed a long time ago. And the Black church isn't going to fix this on their own. The Black financial sector isn't going to fix this problem on their own. Black policy and attorneys and legal, it's going to be a collaborative effort. And I don't think it's just going to be a one group or one community or demographic that actually allows us to see the change that we're really pushing for.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Now, here is another thing as it relates to the work. When you say the work, we're not just talking about putting together a sermon here, right? We're talking about partnering and that sort of thing. And I just kind of want you to unpack that. And I know I'm picking certain things, but I'm doing that on purpose so that those who are listening, who may be members of a church or who may have a pastor who wasn't as vocal at one time, to understand that if they now become more vocal or become more seen in certain arenas, what could be that responsibility as a Christian, right? So let's talk from the work perspective, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I think the first work that God calls us to do is always, I believe that before God calls us to ever do out work, I believe He first calls us to do in work. And so I think that a huge part of the in work is first the first kind of the understanding that we all need to be educated in this, right? And so I think that knowing that there is education that we all have to commit ourselves to. And it's not just committing ourselves to education in a one moment or a 1 week sense, but I think it's committing to a process education, like my brother, DA Watkins was sharing. I think it's huge to realize that there's a myriad of policies, there's a myriad of laws, there's a myriad of things that are on the books. And I know Democracy Now! Does I know Ms. Williams, they do phenomenal work with this. There's a lot of policies and laws that are just on the books that are racist. I mean, the practice of it is racist. So I think first educating oneself to having an understanding and a clear understanding to know, one, what do we need to know and what do people need to share? And then two, empowering people to not tell them what to think, but empowering them to know how to think. So I think a huge part of the work is voter registration, making sure that voter registration is something that it's not just the community's job. It's not just the community organizer's job now. It's also now the pastor's job, knowing that it's not just the community organizer's job to make sure that there's an education about candidates, not just in a presidential space, because a lot of the policies and laws that really affect us aren't necessarily always happening on presidential cycles, and they're not necessarily always happening in presidential elections, but there's midterm elections, there's primary elections. It's knowing who your county commissioners are. It's knowing who your local city representatives are. It's knowing who your police chief is. It's knowing, and so I believe in that. For the Black church, we have a responsibility as pastors, as leaders. We have a responsibility to use our platform to, if we're not in the space to educate, and if we don't know, we have a responsibility to then take our platform and then yield and lend our platform to those who do have knowledge, to those who are vested, and to those who do have community relationships in a way that we can then make sure that this work is truly collaborative and truly in concert with not just one entity and not just one space.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that response really takes us into the voter round too, because I see Adrienne over there shaking her head. So it kind of shifts us into that voter round. But again, anyone who wants to respond in this, thank you so much, Chad. I appreciate that response, and I'll have one last question at the end for everyone. As well. So that brings us into the voter round with Adrienne. So I kind of want you to talk about Democracy NC, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you for this opportunity, for allowing me to join this conversation. This is a pleasure. I've learned so much from just listening to the two gentlemen before me. But yeah, so Democracy North Carolina, we are a nonpartisan organization. We have been doing work in North Carolina for the past 20 years. We are founded by Mr. Bob Hall. And so basically what we do is we go into communities with resources and materials and information to help to empower communities, right? Like Reverend Armstrong said, the goal is to not only have the responsibility of things such as voter registration or holding trainings only with us as the organizers, but to also equip community members, pastors, ministers, everyone in the community to be able to facilitate their own trainings or to facilitate their own voter registration drives, and to make sure that our communities are ready, like Reverend Armstrong said, not only for presidential elections, but also midterm elections, primary elections, so that we can make sure that we have as big of a turnout as possible. So we not only work on the grassroots level, we also work within the legislative level as well. We have our advocacy team that is very active in retaining research and statistics that help us to do work such as early voting advocacy, where we are equipping and getting advocates and community members ready to go into county board of election meetings and to advocate for things such as more early voting sites, also advocating for more early voting hours, especially weekend hours, because we know those are some of the most utilized hours, especially amongst Black and brown voters. North Carolina. So there are a plethora of things that I could list that we are working on currently right now. But that's just a small gist of what we do, of Democracy NC does. Yes.
Great, great, great. And so tell us your role, your specific role as well.
Absolutely. So I'm the regional managing organizer for a region that we call the Greater Triangle. That includes Wake County, Granville County, Vance County, and Warren County, and also parts of Durham County as well. So I am responsible for everything from leadership development to facilitating trainings, to also making sure that materials are being distributed throughout my regions, staying in contact with members of Board of Elections, also to make sure that we're on track in terms of what are their agendas, that they're planning for their next meetings, things of that nature. And so just making sure that we are serving these communities again to where they are able to empower themselves and not having to necessarily have to just rely on us as an organization.
Okay, awesome, awesome. So I have a question. I did read something, and I maybe want you to just elaborate a little bit. And you alluded to it on our initial conversation about how important it is to check your voter registration.
Absolutely.
I think last year in 2019, there was I guess some of the voter registrations were removed. And so I want to talk about that. Because there are some people who think that they're registered to vote right now, and they're going to have to re-register. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So as of 2019, over 500,000 voters have been purged off the North Carolina voting rolls, and majority of those voters are Black and Brown voters. So one thing that we are pushing right now very hard is to show people how to be able to check their status to see if they're active or inactive. And if you are not, there are two options that you have to go ahead and get re-registered. As of March of this year, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, now people are able to register to vote online, which is via the DMV website. The only obligation requirement for that is that you must have a DMV issued license or DMV issued ID card to utilize that option. But we're very thankful that it did come to pass because this year, unfortunately, voter registration rates have plummeted since the pandemic has happened because people are not out doing, the traditional voter registration drives, education forums they typically would do. So now we are really heavily pushing this option for people. And so we're holding various things such as coalition meetings, trainings to show people how to properly use that tool. And of course, if you're someone who does not have a DMV issued license or ID card, you still are able to fill out a traditional paper registration form and just make sure it gets mailed to your county board of elections as well. So yes, it is very, very important. Over 500,000 people have been purged. And one of the things that I have this summer, every summer we call Democracy Summer, where we have interns. I've just been having them calling people, helping to check their registration. Over this past week, we helped to register 54 people. Who thought, they're like, hey, I vote every year, why do I need to check my registration? And it turned out they were not. They had also been purged. So we are urging people to please, and you can go and do this at ncvoter.org, which is a website that is ran by Democracy North Carolina. If you go, the first tab you'll see is voter registration, and it will take you to the direct link that is connected to the State Board of Elections website, where all you have to do is just put in your first and last name, and then you'll just and a plethora of names will come. You find your name, your county, and beside your name, it will say active or inactive. And if you are inactive, you are not registered. So then you need to go ahead and either, again, utilize the DMV website. We're also on ncvoter.org website. We do show you step by step how to properly go about that process to ensure that you do get re-registered again.
Wow. So here's a question, and I wanted to ask, how is it possible for voter registrations to be purged? Like, how does that come about? Is that a requirement from a federal requirement? Is that a state requirement? And then is there criteria? Here's a person that says I vote every year, but is there a criteria that identifies which ones are purged? I'm just trying to understand that, because I'm sure there's someone who's viewing this right now that says, what in the world? How can they just purge the voter registration? So if you can answer that question.
Well, the biggest answer that we hear from the advocacy team is that they claim these are individuals who are not as active in elections, and that is their justification for removing them from the polls. That's the biggest reason. But again, we still have, I had a person I spoke with too on Monday who told me, and you could see it actually on her record, that she voted in the past primary. She voted also in the midterm in 2019, but still, yet she was purged from the rolls. So obviously that's not a justifiable, answer that they've been giving us. And so, which is something that we're trying. Luckily, we do work along with organizations like the Southern Justice Coalition here out of Durham to help to try to combat some of those things. But I can just tell you from the transparency given to me is that the biggest reason is their claim is inactive voter activity, which is obviously not true at all. So especially for majority of people that I've been speaking to, unfortunately.
Wow. Did you have something to say, Charles? I see you. All you have to do is unmute. Go ahead.
So one of the other things, and I didn't mean to step on toes, but one of the other things that happens with that is we use the voter registration roll for jury selection. So a lot of times what happens is, so you're Bianca Richardson, right? You're also Bianca J. Richardson. You're also Bianca Julia Richardson. So you're all these things. So at some point, in some way, your name appears one of those three ways. I'm Charles Watkins. I'm also Charles Edward Watkins. I'm also Charles Edward Watkins Jr. I'm also Charles Watkins Jr. So my name appears one of those three ways. And sometimes on like the jury rolls, but using the voter registration, you have all four names, but I'm really only one person. So sometimes, and this is not to say that there's nothing nefarious going on, but sometimes they purge those names to get the one name that you use most off the jury pools, which also purges you off the voter registration pools. So if you go by Bianca Richardson and they have Bianca J, Bianca Julia, and Bianca on the thing, and they purge Bianca J and Bianca Julia, but when you show up to vote, your driver's license says Bianca Julia, but then they're going to say, I don't have your name on the voter registration. And you won't even know it. Like, you'll have no idea that's what happened. But that happens a lot to with in some of these situations.
Wow. Okay. So that's some different information. I'm not sure if anyone knew that, but that's some certainly different information. So I guess the word out is check your status, right? Yes. Just to make sure that you are. Now I know in North Carolina, what about voter registration? Can we vote the day of election? I know some states are not like that.
Do you mean, can you register on the day of vote?
I'm sorry, can you register? Yeah, the same day of the election.
You can do that during the early voting period. So the 2 weeks before the actual election day, you can register and vote during that period, but you cannot do that on election day. On election day, you need to be registered and set and make sure that you are going to your correct precinct as well. So that's also another reason why it's very important to go and to check that information, because once you see that, okay, yes, I'm registered to vote, also it will tell you where is your precinct, your correct precinct that you need to go to on election day as well. That's why it's very important if you have moved recently to a new location, that you also need to go and re-register to vote. So that way, come election day, if you cannot make it to early voting, that you can make sure you're going to your correct precinct on election day. Because the last thing you want to do is, okay, you go to this precinct, they tell you got to go to another one way across town, or somewhere else, because we know more than likely that when that happens, a voter increases their chances of not actually going to that correct precinct, unfortunately. So that's another reason why too is also very important to utilize, which again, you can still use the ncvoter.org website, and it will show you all of that information once you put in your name to check your registration status as well.
Okay, awesome. Now, before we end this segment here, tell us how to partner with Democracy NC. If you're a church, if you want to volunteer, because I think, as Pastor Chad mentioned, this is a collaborative thing, and we need people to do the work, right? And that's the message. But sometimes people don't know what to do or how to sign up. So, we're partnering with Democracy NC, and I want others to be able to do that too. So tell us how to do that.
Absolutely. So there are a plethora of ways. We are always looking for advocates and volunteers to do various works. One of the biggest things that's happening now, like I mentioned earlier, is our early voting advocacy. Because right now, County Board of Elections have until the end of this month to finalize their early voting plans. That includes finalizing early voting sites and also finalizing their early voting hours as well. So if you go to democracync.org and you look and you type into the search engine early voting advocacy, you can go ahead and put in your information. It's sent to our advocacy team. Also, you can go to our event section, and you will see where we have different early voting advocacy opportunities based on each county, where you are able to RSVP. We'll show you the Zoom link. If the meeting is via Zoom, we'll show you the phone conference link. It's via phone conference. And we will give you what we call our early voting advocacy report form, because there are certain particular things that you need to be looking for. And also, once you fill out that form that is sent back to our advocacy team, you will also be giving talking points as well, and things that is suggested that we're trying to advocate for. Like for right now in Warren County, we're fighting to try to get them to add on extra some more early voting sites, because for the entire county, there's only one early voting site for that serves one county. So what we'll do is, so there are specific acts that we need for advocates to ask for when it comes for that comment section portion of the meeting. So that way, once you go in there, you're not going in there blind. You have guidance as well. So also you can get in contact with me, with myself, because right now myself and my organizing assistants, that's something that we're working very heavily hard with the advocacy team, because it is so time sensitive. Again, we only have until the end of the month. So that's one way. Also, by attending what we call our coalition meetings, we have meetings throughout the entire state, not only in this area. We have an organizer in Charlotte and Asheville, and also in Pitt County and Winston-Salem. So you can also go on the events list. All you have to do is just put in your information, RSVP, and the RMO in that region will go more into depth as to what it is. There may be some particular projects that they're working on specifically as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, absolutely. No, that's great, because there might be people who want to volunteer, right? And then something that we talked about, with voting, but we also talked about being an informed voter, because right now with the height of the topic, anyone can change their platform to take advantage of popularity right now, right? Anyone can do that. But what matters is what they voted for 6 months ago. What matters is what their voting record is a year ago. And because we see then their trend and what they really believe. And so, those who are watching, those who are voters, those who go out, those who are registered, I'm challenging you who are watching not just to go to vote. And we're not talking about the presidential election. We're talking about for the governor. We're talking about for the mayor. We're talking about for, the school system, any of those, what we call small elections. Actually, those are the big elections. Yeah. Those are the elections that make or break us locally. I know we look at the presidential election, but we're talking about a person who may only be in office for 4 years or 8 years, and then they're out, right? But we're talking about people who have been in, have made a career out of this, who have been in for 25 years and 30 years and all of this, who have impacted our lives today. And so I'm challenging you to find out about your candidates this time, to put some time in to find out about your candidates, okay? The last question, and this is for everyone. I know that we represent organizations and that sort of thing, but if you had to encourage someone, I'm just very conscious of those who don't vote very often. Maybe it might be a young person who this might be their first time voting, right? And everything is going on and we're in a pandemic and we may have to do absentee voting. And there may be some others who are discouraged with the system. I've heard that as well, where, people are saying, well, we voted before and we didn't get the candidate we wanted, right? And they don't see, the impact. There are those who are protesting, and we're seeing results as it relates to cases and different other things that are happening, but that does not equate to an actual law change. I know that we're seeing things that are happening and we view that as action. And so I think this is not just a reactive thing. This is a long haul thing. And I want you to think about it. It's up to you if you want to answer. But if you can encourage someone, maybe give someone something to think about, maybe give someone something to consider that fits in those categories, to be a more active voter, to get in the work like Pastor Chad talked about, even encouraged to understand that there shouldn't be a divide between justice and the church, right? Whatever that is, just kind of give us something to encourage us, a minute or two, whatever you have, whoever wants to start first.
Well, I'll start. I think I want to talk a little bit about the voting thing. Because I hear people say a lot, well, I didn't get the candidate I wanted, so why did I vote? My vote didn't count. My candidate won especially for the presidential election, my candidate won the popular election, but didn't win the electoral college, and so my candidate didn't win. So why do I vote? Why does my vote count? Why does it matter? It matters not just because you voted for that candidate, but because you voted for that candidate's ideals, because you aligned yourself with the ideals of a candidate that you thought best represented you. And some of those ideals are going to bleed through to the candidate who won. And so while your candidate didn't specifically necessarily win the election, your ideals can still shine through. Your ideals and the things that you wanted can still shine through. If you are in favor of prison reform and you have a candidate that is in favor of prison reform and you vote for that candidate and that candidate does really well and that candidate polls very high on the country or the state or the city or wherever this election was held in prison reform, and the winner did not, the winner, if that winner wants to win again, is going to have to address your concerns on prison reform. So in that respect, that's why voting matters. It matters because even though your voice may not win, when you vote, you make your voice heard. And that's the biggest thing.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I always tell people this, that when you do not vote, you are allowing someone else to vote for you, essentially. And that vote could be a complete opposite reflection of what your beliefs are, what it is that you stand for. And everything from defunding of police departments to making sure that school boards are implementing proper practices to make sure our children are going to be safe when they go back this coming August. It all comes down to your votes. Everything is connected to the vote, and so we've had the stages of protesting, making our voices heard. Look at what we've been able to accomplish in just these couple of weeks with tearing down, having these Confederate statues being brought down across the country, to now local government listening to our demands when it comes to how they're addressing these police departments. Now it's time for us to take it to the next step further. We were able to make our voices heard in 2008. Look at what happened in that election, and also in 2012. And now this election it cannot be more. Every election is important, but especially this upcoming election. So I always tell people, every aspect of your life, it all ties to voting. In every social issue, again, whether it's police brutality, whether it is environmental injustices, it all ties to the votes. So that's why, like you said, you doing that research on these candidates and seeing what it is that they stand for is extremely important. And I challenge too for churches. I'm working with my social justice ministry right now, where we're going to do a project come September, even though I will be just being done giving birth to my son on September the 11th. But I'm still going to be going back and making sure that we're getting those assignments done, and we're informing our church members so we can know, okay, these are the people that we're not telling you how to vote, but we're just putting the information out there for you, because we know that when voters have more knowledge about candidates and offices, it increases the likelihood of them actually going out and voting. So again, remember, every aspect of your life, it all comes back around to the votes. So that's what I would say.
Okay. Pastor Chad? Uh-oh, you're muted. Let me unmute you. Pastor Chad, can you unmute? You're muted. There you go.
Sorry about that. I'm
That's
terrible
okay.
with technology too. I'm the terrible with technology guy. But so to echo what my brother and sister just said, I think it's huge, and it's so valuable to know that voting really matters. And like Sister Williams just said, knowing that voting on not just those presidential cycle years, not just knowing those presidential candidates, but knowing those candidates who are local and more grassroots, if you would, to the work, I think is huge and important. So to share just two things really quickly, and then just to say like one preacher thing, is that I think that a great tool for educating yourself in voting now more so than ever is at Vote on Purpose, and so you can literally just kind of go on Instagram, or you can go to the Vote on Purpose app, and so that is a way that I think that you can kind of go in. You can look at you can type in your area, and then you can immediately kind of see who's running, what they're running for, what is their platform, what is their party affiliation, and you can kind of see if they do have any history as far as policy, legislation, that type of work. I think that that's a great tool. Also, something that I think is huge to plug is Our Black Party. And so Our Black Party is something that's going to be launching really, really soon. A lot of incredible people who are involved in that work. And so that is something that I think people should really be looking out for. It should be launching on the 4th of July, actually, which is going to be a really cool thing. for a lot of people, and I think it's going to use a lot of resources to kind of tie in those candidates together. Something that we've been working on is we've been getting some local rappers, and so we've been getting rappers from like specifically their area to talk about the candidates that they're voting for. So we're basically kind of getting rappers to share this is and different influencers to say this is my area, this is my location, this is my locale, this is my zip code, and this is who we're voting for based upon policy, and you can kind of see that. So that's huge for me. I think that there's the last thing I'll say is there's an ancient Old Testament prophet named Micah, who is a famous verse, Micah 6:8, and Micah is kind of saying, what does the Lord require of me? And kind of the statement that kind of gets surmised is it says that the Lord requires for us to do justice, for us to love mercy, and for us to walk humbly. I think now more so than ever, it's understanding, getting people to realize that like it's your Christian duty to wear a face mask. It's your Christian duty to make sure you're registered to vote. It's your Christian duty to make sure that you vote. This isn't just something that I think is something that like we can maybe do or not do. I think that it is like specifically tied to how we love God, the work that we do for others. And I think that the work that every one of us can do is educate ourselves in voting, and then make sure that we're not only registered to vote, but that we get out to vote. And then once we've made sure of those things, to make sure that we're able to then to use our platform, our resources, our space, to then make sure that other people aren't just able to vote, they're not just registered to vote, but that they're also educated. Because now more so than ever, we just cannot afford to leave things to chance. And when you just leave things to chance, that's how you end up with the White House looking how it is.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Listen, I have one question that came in, and this is about voting. Thank you so much, Pastor Chad. Awesome. Okay. This is about voting. It says, why do electoral votes override popular votes in electing our president? Anybody take a stab at that? I think
you want to get that, Charles, or do you want me to get that since you're the lawyer?
It goes back to the foundation of the country. It was kind of what was agreed to as a part of the Constitutional Congress. They created the Electoral College, and so the popular vote, you know, people always say the popular vote doesn't matter. It matters because the popular vote usually mirrors the Electoral College. I think only maybe 2 times in my lifetime have I ever seen that I can remember, and I might be off, but I think only in 2000 with George W. Bush and Al Gore, and in most recently in 2016 has the person who won the popular vote not also won the Electoral College. And so the reason why they do that is because of it's an old thing that goes back to the foundation of the country and how our presidents were elected. They created the Electoral College as kind of a way to essentially just like make it easier to count votes. It's essentially the way this what happens. And the reason why the Electoral College overrides is because of tradition. Like that, I know that's not the answer you probably wanted, but that's the answer. It overrides because it's an old holdover from the creating of the Constitutional Congress, because it used to be based on population, and you got to go back to look at like 3/5 compromise and all the things that led up to the Civil War to try to figure out how they decided the Electoral College, because the South was way more populated than the North pre-Civil War because of the 3/5 compromise, because of the slaves. So the slaves counted 3/5 of a person, so there were more people in the South than there were in the North, and all of that. And that's why. Like I need a longer time to explain why the Electoral College, but that's the basic.
Okay.
Can I add to that?
Did you want to add? Yeah. I'm sorry, Chad.
because we're in a census year. And so, like my brother said, especially with the 3/5 compromise, I think it's huge for Black people to understand that literally when you fill out your census, it is a sign of resistance in what your ancestors went through, because our ancestors were only counted at best 3/5 of a human being. It's amended, but for a long time in the Constitution of the United States of America, it was 3/5 of a human being. And that was literally in relationship to taxes and a whole bunch of other things. But so like when we fill out our census and when we fill out that 2020 census, it also allows us to not just have our voice counted when we vote, but it allows for our actual Black body to be counted for in America. And so for America to have a history of not caring for Black bodies and not properly counting Black bodies, when we do the work of filling out that census, even though it seems small, even though it might seem trivial, it does actually have economic impact. It has legislative impact. It has policy impact into how counting is done, into how districts are drawn, and then how we are able to then have the landscape set for how we can then push for change. But we have to also fill out our census, because in filling out our census, it makes sure that for so many Black people who historically weren't counted, that now we are counted. And so I'm sorry.
No, that's great. That's an awesome point. That's an awesome point. Thank you for sharing that. All right, Adrian, did you want to add something?
No, I mean, that's pretty much in a nutshell, exactly what Mr. Hawkins said, pretty much. So.
All right. And someone said it looks like, it sounds like it's time for a change. Right. And how crucial the census is. So I don't have any other questions. But I want to thank each and every one of you for your time, for your opinion. That was an awesome point, Pastor Chad, about the census, right? Because oftentimes that's overlooked. You know, we get the mail and we throw it away. We get the reminder and we throw it away. We get the call. But that is an awesome reminder of, being counted, actually be able to be counted and impact that way. Thank you again so much for your time and for being on tonight. I'm sure we'll have another discussion as well as things progress. I'd love to bring you guys back on, maybe to talk about something else, but related to this. Charles, you had something?
No, I didn't. I'm sorry.
All right. All right. Thank you all so much. All right. St. James, thank you for your attending and your question, Sister Graves. And to all of those, if you have any further questions that may pop up, definitely inbox us, direct message us, let us know, and we'll get a response to you. I'm truly excited that we had an opportunity to have Pastor Chad on, as well as Charles Watkins and Miss Williams as well from Democracy MC. This has been awesome, and we will continue this. Those who are watching us, if you want to join us on tomorrow night for a live session, we have these on Thursdays at 7 p.m. I'm excited because Derek Germain, our director of music, is going to be on, and I'm excited to hear what he's going to have to say. Good night. Thank you so much for tuning in, and God bless you.